But the reality is that there are those that are life-altering situations that we all know about, and many of us who are sitting here, you know what I'm talking about. That sometimes make you wonder, has God abandoned me or my family to defeat? Maybe for you it's school fees. You prayed that God will provide for you to go through school, and then you've been handed a letter to vacate the school. Maybe for you it's a job situation. You've been praying that God will resolve the issue at your workspace, but then you got an exit letter or you are retrenched. Maybe for some of us it's a relationship, and looking at your parents' relationships, you knew that the inevitable was coming. Or maybe it's not even your parents' relationship, it is your relationship. And you knew that the inevitable was coming. You knew that at some point, the way things are going, you'll probably part ways. And you woke up one morning and the other person is not there. Maybe it's health. You've been praying fervently. And I'm not talking about those casual prayers that you make. You probably even have been fasting and praying for yourself or even for this loved one. And then finally, the doctor hands you that report that confirms that, yes, it's a terminal illness. Or maybe for you, it's a child. You've been praying for a child for very long. And finally, you've conceived. But then you get a miscarriage. And these are situations that make you feel that life will never be the same again. That God has abandoned us to defeat. He has left us alone in the cold. And we don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. We don't even know where to go. And I want you to hold on to that thought, because I'm gonna come back to it. Today we begin a new series titled 72 Hours and the 3 most important days of your life. And you're going to be looking at these 3 days, and you wonder what these 3 days are. But they're the 3 days that took place over 2,000 years ago, and yet they are extremely relevant for each and every one of us here. And I'm talking about what we famously now know as Easter. And throughout this month, I'm going to be breaking down every single day, which according to the Bible is the most significant weekend or the most significant days after or since creation. Think about any famous people that you know, anyone whose biography has been written. And you'll find that more often that the biographers will write a lot. In fact, they'll spend like all the chapters talking about the kind of life that this person lived and the things that they were able to do while they were alive. They rarely talk about the death of this person. And you'll find that their story of death will be tucked in like at the end or in a paragraph, or probably, you know, if there's more to talk about, they'll probably give it like a chapter. Enter Jesus, and we have 4 accounts, and I've talked about this: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in each of these 4 retellings, it's like all the stories were building up to the death of Jesus. His death was so important that just the last week of his life takes up a whole lot of space in these 4 retellings. I mean, when you look at Matthew, a quarter of his book, 28 chapters, a quarter of his book spends talking about, you know, the triumphant entry into Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was the final city that Jesus went into before he was crucified. And that entire week takes up a quarter of his entire book. When you look at Mark spends 6 out of 16 chapters, more than a third of his book. Luke dedicates nearly a quarter of his account to this the final days of Jesus. And John, get this, 10 out of 21 chapters, almost half dedicated to this. Clearly there was something significant, that even a small scared band of fishermen and tax collectors was transformed into fearless people, a group of preachers and healers and church planters, people who lived beyond themselves to the very kingdom of God. There was something significant that continues to bear upon the lives of over a third of the global population up to date. Something significant that makes these 3 days that we know as Easter relevant for you and I, and important for you and I. And this entire month, every Sunday, I will dig deeper into each day. And today I want to begin with Friday. This series is for those of you who are pretty excited about your relationship with God. You know, you've been loving God, you've been serving God, and there are many things that you're doing with God, and you feel like everything is going on well. And my hope is that this series will give you a different perspective about your faith, so that you can be able to encounter and know, take anything that life throws at you in the years ahead. This series is also for you, for some of us who probably stuff happened in the past. And you're here, and this is your attempt to sort of restore this relationship with God. And there's some things that happened in the past that left you with some unresolved questions. And my hope is that this series will begin to answer some of those unresolved questions. If this is you, and you're here, and maybe this is your very first time back to church, or after such a long time, I'm glad that you're here, because even if you don't believe in this Jesus stuff, in this God stuff, it's okay, because we're going to be tackling some very real issues that are true for everyone, regardless of who you believe in or not. We're going to be talking about things, life issues, that will sort of help us find, and find out solutions on how we can counter these issues. So what do you do when you feel that God has abandoned you to defeat? And to answer that, ladies and gentlemen, the following takes place between Thursday evening and Friday, 3 p.m. Have you heard those words before? I want to start off this series by sort of building the context around Jesus' death, because if you miss out on the death, on the events around Jesus' death, then you'll probably miss out the entire series. As we try to answer this question, what do you do when all you have was gone, has gone, or all you had has gone? God has abandoned you. And I want you to do me a favor. For the next few minutes, I would like you to forget everything that you know or have believed or you've heard about Easter. Now, because at the end of this, I would like you to go back and even reread this story, but with an interesting perspective. Because sometimes we come into church with our own preconceived ideas, and we miss out on what God really wants to tell us. So if you can just, for the next few minutes, put aside everything that you know or have heard or believed or even read. Because you'll find this story in the final chapters of the Gospels, as I've talked about. And I'll encourage you, go back and read it for yourself, but now with an interesting perspective. Because today, I want to focus on Matthew and the account of Matthew. Because by any account, Jesus' death was a miscarriage of justice. Because when you read the story of Jesus, you'll find that all that he did was good. All that Jesus did, he taught about the kingdom of God. He taught about things, values and principles in life that we can apply in life. He healed many. He fed thousands of people. There were miracles that were happening left, right, and center. He did well. He taught about love. Jesus Christ was the true description of love. He was love himself. He even transformed many to become fearless influencers in their sector. But somehow, these very things that he was doing, the good things that were happening around him, were the very things that got him into trouble, were the very things that made him become a threat to the authorities. Now, when I talk about the authorities here, the Jewish religious leaders, which consisted of the Pharisees and also the chief priests, they plotted to kill Jesus. Now you wonder why the chief priest would be against Jesus, because I mean, you expect that as a priest, they should be for Jesus. But these guys, they felt threatened by Jesus' popularity and by the fact that he openly contradicted them in public. Because everything they were for, it seemed like Jesus was against. He was a threat to their entire religious system. They had created this own religious system of themselves that was devoid of God. And they feared that this guy might actually become too popular, that it will get the Roman government attention. And Rome will surely come raining down on them. Now, you wonder why Rome is critical in this story. You see, Rome was the oppressive government of the day. And it was anyone who was perceived to be against Rome will be annihilated. So anyone who even spoke against Rome, they will get rid of them. And Jesus checks into the picture and he becomes a threat to Rome. And one of the things that he did that made him a threat to Rome was the fact that he claimed that he's the Messiah, the anointed one of God. It is important for us to understand that the people of Israel at that particular point, they had undergone a lot of oppression and dictatorial rulership. So according to them, in fact, they had prayed, they had desired for God to send one who will come and deliver them from all this oppression. So anyone who came and claimed that they were the Messiah will be the one who will deliver them from all this oppression. And based on what Jesus had done and what Jesus had said, then according to them, he must have been the Messiah. He must have been the one who will come and lead them into freedom. But was that Jesus' plan? No, it wasn't. In fact, several times when you read through the story of Jesus, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I can spend probably a whole year talking about the story of Jesus. But when you read through the story of Jesus, you find that the crowds wanted to force him to become their king. And oftentimes, and all the time, Jesus will refuse. And he stayed away from that because he knew it will take away from his purpose. And so the chief priests, they plotted to execute Jesus for their selfish reasons, because they figured that Rome is so powerful that the only thing that we can do is collaborate with them in what they want to do and make sure that they are happy, so that we don't get into trouble, so that we stay alive. It will benefit us, and also the temple will keep running. But then the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, on the other hand, these guys were populists, because they believed that God will bless them. They believed that God will cleanse their land if only each and every person stuck to the letter of the law. So according to them, Jesus was not sticking to the letter of the law. And everywhere when you read the story of Jesus, you'll find that Jesus contradicted them, because these are laws that they were given hundreds of years before in their own rebellious nature. So according to them, Jesus was a rebel. To make things worse, Judas, who is one of his closest followers, will betray him. In fact, you find this in the conversation on Thursday evening when they're having this what we know now as Last Supper. He will betray him. And as if that is not enough, when it rains, it pours. His closest followers were to desert him. And he knew about it. In fact, you read this in Matthew 26:31, where he says, "Tonight, all of you will desert me." Jesus knew about it. And this is the situation that he is in. And so, knowing what is about to happen, what does he do? He calls his closest followers. These are his three good friends, Peter, James, and John. And here's something that you need to know, because as he was going to pray, Jesus Christ, when he was on earth, he was fully God, but fully human. He was fully God and fully human. And because he was fully human, Jesus by this point was overwhelmed like any human will be when they are faced with betrayal, when they are faced with pain. He knew what was coming, and it was heavy stuff. And he says to his disciples in verse 38, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Jesus knew what was coming. In fact, scholars say that this was like a double death, because not only was he dying the physical death, he was also dying the spiritual death, because he was going to be separated from his Father in heaven because of our sins. My soul is in anguish, and he invites his three friends, stay here and keep watch with me. In other words, my guys, I'm in serious pain. And then we are told he goes to a secluded place, not once, not twice, but 3 times. He goes to a secluded place to pray. Verse 9, we're told he went on a little farther and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Now, this was not a casual conversation the way I'm having this conversation with you. In fact, another version of this account tells us that his sweat was dropping like blood, meaning that this must have been an intense time for him. And he's like, Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. And that was the first time. And then the second time, verse 42, we are told, then Jesus left them. Remember the three. He came back from his secluded place, and he comes after praying for the very first time. He finds that the guys are asleep. And I wonder, how many of us, you know what that feels like? Those moments when you think that people are with you, but they are not with you. This is what Jesus was going through, because he thought his 3 guys were keeping watch and praying, but they were not there. But the second time he prayed, my Father, if this cup, referring to the cup again, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done. Verse 44, same thing. So he went to pray a 3rd time, saying the same things again. This story is too familiar to many of us, because we've knocked on heaven's doors not once but many times about particular incidences or situations in our lives. And I want to tell us that Jesus' agony was worse than death. And that's why he prayed, Daddy, I don't want this thing to happen. I don't want this thing to happen. He knew that what I'm facing is worse than even death itself. And just as he had predicted, early in the morning on Friday morning, he gets arrested. And his followers scatter. And they leave him to the mercies of the religious leaders who falsely accuse him. They cook up some evidence, and then they rush him to the governor Pilate. Now, Pilate, those of us who are familiar with this story, Pilate, his leadership was muddled with a lot of corruption, a lot of murders, execution. I mean, this guy was just nasty. Pilate was just one of those nasty guys, and because he as much as he tried to find Jesus guilty, he couldn't find him guilty based on all the charges that he was given for Jesus, and he wanted to please his bosses in Rome. He wanted to align himself with Rome, and he seemed to be overwhelmed also by the volatile crowds, and what these guys wanted, because they kept on chanting, crucify him, kill him, referring to Jesus. And somehow, because he was overwhelmed by the demands of these people, he handed Jesus over to these crowds. The story continues, and Jesus is flogged, which, by the way, would have killed him. Because the procedure was that you bear your upper half of your body, and then they will whip you with a 3-pronged whip that had lead pieces at the end. So this would have actually killed him. And they mocked him, and they spat on him, they abused him, they hit him with sticks, they kicked him on the head, and then they crucified him. And my friends, it's hard for me to convey how brutal, how humiliating it was, because of how you and I have become desensitized to the symbol of the cross. I mean, many of us are looking at this picture and you're thinking it's graphic. It's not even graphic based on what Jesus went through. Because nowadays the cross has become a fashion statement. And we no longer think about what happened. This was it was a shaming act saved for violent criminals, insurrectionists, people who are inclined to toward rebellion. The person hanging on the cross, just trying to describe this to you, will find it even difficult to breathe because of how their chest and their lungs were positioned. And what they will do is that they'll try and lift themselves up. But because of exhaustion and the pain, they will at some point even let go. But then now their feet and the nails in the feet and also their hands will bear all the weight of this person, until they finally succumb. And this can take hours, sometimes even days, until the person succumbs to either dehydration, heart rupture, or several other causes that are out there, even infections. And guys, this is the death that Jesus died by Roman execution. And it is right there that Jesus cries out in Matthew 27:46, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? And this is the death that Jesus cries out, expressing his anguish. And the word that he uses here, Eli, is not the same one that he used at the garden when he was crying out to his father to take this cup away from him. This is a more distant, more formal description, because Eli means holy and almighty God. And he was expressing his horror of the total separation that he was to go through from his God, from his Father. And this is what makes the story of Jesus so believably true. If you're here and you don't believe in this Jesus story, because what kind of religion would want to portray or present such a picture of their God in this way? What kind of faith will dwell so long in talking about the death of their God and put him in such a bad light and shameful picture? Because the reality is that if you and I were Bible writers, we'll probably minimize this story. Guys, this was terrible. This was bad PR even for God's kingdom. You need to understand that in the Roman context at that time, the reason why they will crucify these people and leave them even hanging there for days is because they wanted it to be a lesson to the many people out there, just in case you want to come against Rome, just in case you want to say anything against Rome. This is how your life is going to end up. So the people, the Roman government, the people, the chief priests, they felt like they had defeated Jesus. And this is what describes Friday. This is what is happening at that particular point. But you see, for many of us, for some of us, it is difficult to understand the intensity of the events of Friday, because we love what is to come on Sunday. We love the resurrection, the empty tomb on Sunday. Okay, so Jesus died, but he rose again. So let's not dwell in the past, Let's focus on the future because, Jesus Christ is risen, and we shout out, he's risen. And we want to rush through the crucifixion so that we can celebrate the power of the resurrection. But I want to tell us something, that one of the major consequences of not understanding Friday is that we have no place of suffering in our lives. Because all we are doing is that we don't want to focus on the suffering on Friday. Because guys, you need to understand that the disciples didn't know that Sunday was coming. And as much as Jesus had told them that on the third day I will rise again, they could not comprehend that in their minds. They could not understand that Sunday was still coming. So according to them, Friday, everything is over. It is the end. Our leader is here on a tree, and he's dead. And here's the danger that we face as Christians, and that's why many Christians even live in a state of disappointment, in a state of giving up, in a state of misery. And it is because whenever we go through troubles and challenges in life, we are always focusing on the day that our victory will come. We don't want to go through this pain and this because we know that Sunday is coming. We know, and we live waiting. In fact, we are waiting. In fact, we've turned our seats and we are looking at the door, waiting for the day the door will open and our blessing will come running into us. Our miracles will come to us. But I want you to understand that Jesus is dead. Everything that the disciples knew is now gone. Their hopes and dreams to live in royalty, because these guys had become famous. They had been known. They had seen the things that God was doing through Jesus. And they didn't know that Sunday was coming. They were stuck in this Friday. And if Jesus' last words were, my God, why have you abandoned me? Then what do we do with our lives? What do we do with our lives? And this is the story of many of us here. We have gone through seasons of excruciating pain where we felt abandoned by God. And not just by God, but by everyone else around us. You have those moments when you feel like, life has come to an end. And many of us have Fridays in our lives where the hope that we had was taken away. The very thing that gave us life or gave us meaning was taken away. And probably even in an abrupt way. What is your Friday story? What is your Friday story? Is it your job? Maybe you prayed for that job, but now you've lost it. What is your Friday story? Maybe it's your health. And you prayed fervently for this. You fasted about it. But then the doctor has handed you that report that confirms, yes, it is terminal illness. And now you've started counting down your days. What is your Friday story? Maybe it's your relationship. Maybe it's your marriage. What is your Friday story? Because on Friday, the world comes tumbling down. And everything that you knew, the hope that you had, is now over. On Friday, life ends as we know it. And many of us find it difficult to move on, find it difficult to accept it. On Friday, Jesus died with loud cries. He did. And even though his Father in heaven heard him, he still allowed him to go through the pain and die. And I'm here to tell you that for those Friday seasons, we have presidents. That the one true Messiah, Jesus Christ, knowing very well our rebellious nature, knowing very well the consequences that he had to take upon himself in order to redeem us, the physical pain that he had to endure, the separation from God, his Father. He knew all that was coming and he went ahead to do it, to do whatever it took for us to be reconciled to him. Jesus went through pain and evil unimaginable because of the amazing love that he has for you and I, and the desires that he has for us to be reconciled. And friends, the reality is that when our dreams are shattered, when we feel like God has abandoned us to defeat, when we enter those bad seasons in our lives, we do not want to believe that that's God's plan for us. In fact, we deny, and we probably even live in denial. And we start questioning His sovereignty. And then we shrink God to the size of us when we begin to limit Him to our thinking and our reasoning. And we can only see Him through the filters of our problems, through the filters of the prayers that He hasn't answered on our behalf yet. And unfortunately, we reach certain conclusions that my circumstances reflect what God thinks or feels about me. And God is saying, no, it doesn't. I want you to look at the bigger picture. I want you to look at the cross. Look at the cross and what I did at the cross. Then I want you to look back at your situation. Look back at that thing that you've been praying for a very long time. And now I want you to look back at the cross. Because your current situation is not a reflection of what God feels about you. It is not. And rather than trying to rationalize why God did not heal me, why He didn't intervene and prevent the accident, or why things worked out the way they did, I look at Jesus on that cross, suffering for something that He didn't even have to. He didn't need to. And I realize that for myself, that God is still with me and able to work even through my pain and my defeat. I look at the cross and I'm reminded that God's plan was love for me and for you before we were even born. He doesn't love me because of what I do or I don't do. He doesn't love me because of what I have or I don't have. He loves me, and that's it. And there's nothing on this earth, there's nothing in heaven that was, that is, and ever will be greater than the love that God has for you and I. There is no dream, there is no desire, there is no job that can ever surpass the love that God showed for us on the cross. I know that it's painful. I know that you're praying for a miracle. I know that you're praying for a job. I know that you've been petitioning God, and you've been asking for these miracles and breakthroughs in your life. But my hope is that today you'll begin to see that there's nothing, not your miracles today can ever surpass what Christ did on the cross for you. Because your current situation is not a reflection of what God feels about you. Jesus, the most human of us all, the one who was and did as we were created to be and do, the one who lived as we were supposed to live. He loved as we were supposed to love. He cared the way we were supposed to care. Jesus Christ, the Jesus of Nazareth, the one who showed God to the world in all His goodness, in all His inexplicable humility, in all His extravagant grace and mercy. This man, Jesus of Nazareth, became the sacrifice for all of us. God in Jesus absorbed and dealt with way more than our present troubles today. And what He did was beyond your desired miracle today. What Jesus did on that cross is beyond your desired miracle today. On that Friday, even though He knew the agony that was to come, He was still able to declare to God His Father, "Let your will be done." In other words, He said, "Kevin, let me die for you. Let me die for you." You may never understand this when your dreams are shattered. You may never understand what I did when I don't answer your prayer the way you want me to answer your prayer. You may never understand this, but my hope, I want you to know that I do understand your pain. I do understand your darkness, your shame. I do understand your humiliation and what you've been able to go through in your life. Jesus, identifies with what you're going through. But in all that, I want you to know that your current situation is not a reflection of what I feel about you. And there's no greater love than that. Your situation may have changed for us. And maybe the very thing that you're hoping for will not come. But I want to encourage you that you wake up tomorrow morning knowing that Jesus loves you even more. That my love for you, here, please get this. Jesus is saying, my love for you is not dependent on what I give you or what you give me. It is not dependent on what you have or don't have. My love for you is dependent on what I did on the cross. Will you ever get that job? Will you ever get that child? Will you ever get that spouse? Will you ever recover from your health? Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe not. But my prayer for you is that somehow you'll be able to see the bigger picture beyond your now. That your current situation is not a reflection of what God feels about you. Friends, messages like this sometimes are not emotionally satisfying. They're not romantic. They're not. But it's the very thing that God has given us to hang on to amid our situation, our grave situations. It is that thread that we can hang on to even when everything around us is saying not to trust in God. When everyone and everything is saying don't trust in God. God didn't and probably won't answer your prayer the way you want Him to. And you will wonder why. In fact, maybe even your reason to come to church is because you're trying to answer why. The thing to note is that our Christian faith is anchored on dying to self. We have to give of ourselves, but also trusting in God completely, trusting in Him when you feel abandoned to defeat. And if you continue to believe and trust, you will, you may, you probably will capture a glimpse of the glory of God amid that thing in which you are absolutely convinced that God should come through for you. And you, and especially those around you, shall see the God in your life, because your current situation is not a reflection of what God feels about you.